Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the January 13th edition of Horses to Watch, where I highlight some horses to follow and potentially bet back, usually focusing on the New York circuit. But this week, I've got to be honest, I combed through the trips at Aqueduct, didn't see too many horses that I really thought were adversely affected. There weren't track bias situations to highlight. No horses had real trouble in races that at least I could find. So I didn't want to be disingenuous about it and come up with some trips that I just didn't think were really worthy of discussion. So I'm going to kind of change up the format this week and talk about three horses that won races, actually just maiden races from all around the country. Not necessarily horses that are going to offer value when they run back, but just ones that seem to possess a lot of talent and might be horses that are just worth following from the perspective of being a fan of some talented horses. So we're going to start off on that theme with the race from last Friday at Tampa Bay Downs. It was race 7 on that card, a maiden special weight, going 1 mile on the turf for 4-year-olds and up. Actually, all the races we're going to talk about are turf races. Let's break these horses from the gate, and we're going to focus on the number 10, Principled Stand. This is a Klarvich Stables, Chad Brown first-time starter that was debuting at Tampa. It's getting in a slightly easier spot rather than debuting against some tougher competition at Gulfstream. But this horse was nevertheless sent off at 7-2, a little bit dead on the board. He didn't run like a horse that was dead on the board, though, because as you can see coming by the stands here for the first time, this horse is very keyed up, very aggressive into the first turn. He easily crossed over to the front from that outside post position, but his rider, Antonio Gallardo, is trying to get a handle on him to get him to relax a little bit. So he sets him more on his moderate pace up front, and he kind of backed up in horses' faces as they broke for that clubhouse turn, causing a bit of a traffic jam in behind him. As they run onto the backstretch, though, this horse does settle down a little bit, gets into a nice rhythm. You see that first quarter go up in 22 and 4/5 seconds. That might sound like it's very fast, though keep in mind at Tampa Bay Downs, they use a pretty long run-up for these 1 mile races. So if you watch a lot of races that are routes on this Tampa Bay turf course, you do see a lot of pretty quick first quarter miles and then a moderation of the pace for the half. That's exactly what we're seeing in this race. So I'm not going to argue that the pace was fast by any stretch, but this horse is nevertheless doing it very easily. And as they come around the far turn here, you see that the runners behind him are already off the bridle. Their riders are asking them to get after this horse. Meanwhile, Principled Stand has not been asked for any run yet, and he's just starting to widen away from this field. And once they get into the stretch here, Gallardo sets him loose, and this horse is just going to run away from this field with a ton of ease. I mean, he takes the whip out briefly, gives him a crack there, but then this horse just basically does the final eighth of a mile all on his own. He's geared down once they get to the 16th pole, and he is just opening up on this field, really just rocketing through the final eighth of a mile here. Now, this was not the fastest race in the world. We have to be honest about this. This horse just got a 75 buyer, a 97 time form US speed figure. When I was looking at the charts this day, it was a fast race compared to the other turf races, but they were lower level turf for horses competing in the other races on this card. So I understand why the figure came back low. Looking at the horses that finished behind him, it's kind of tough to get a gauge on how good they are. The runner-up in this race, Growl Tiger, he had gotten a much higher speed figure in his debut in New York, but had done so on the dirt, so it's unclear how good that horse is on the turf. Another horse that finished in behind, Alonzo Mosley, had previously run much higher speed figures on the turf, but he was coming off a long layoff here, so I don't really know what we got from him. So I think the jury's still out on the quality of this race, but there's no doubt that Principled Stand was just much better than these horses, and I think this one has a really bright future. He was a near $300,000 purchase as a yearling at the Tattersall sale. It's obviously taken him a very long time to get to the races, but he's a son of Kingman. There's pedigree to go much longer on the dam side. So I think Chad Brown's got a good horse on his hands, and it'll be interesting to see where he places this horse in subsequent starts. Let's now move on to some 3-year-old action, Principled Stand being a 4-year-old, and talk about a couple more races. One of those is from Santa Anita. This one's from last Saturday's card. It's race 7. Again, we're going a mile on the turf, maiden special weight event. I want to focus on the number 1, Earl's Rock. Let's break these horses from the gate, and you're going to see Earl's Rock gets a pretty good trip in this race. There's really, this is the opposite of a trip horse. He gets a perfect trip. But I want to focus on this horse nevertheless, because I think that he's got a lot of talent. Earl's Rock was making his US debut here and first start off a trainer switch for Phil D'Amato. Phil D'Amato does a great job with turf horses out in California. And this is one who had shown some ability as a 2-year-old racing in Ireland. He had just made 1 start in Ireland last year, was second in that race, I believe going 6.5 or 7 furlongs to a horse named A Case of You, who in addition to being named after a great Joni Mitchell song, is also a pretty good horse in his own right. That horse, A Case of You, who beat Earl's Rock, came back to win a Group 3 race after that in Ireland. So I think that it was proven that Earl's Rock had some quality coming into this race as he returned from the layoff, and he's going to show some real talent in this race. You see, he's getting a good trip as they on the backstretch here. He's the number 1 horse in behind, getting that perfect pocketed up turf trip in behind horses. The pace of this race is on the moderate side. They're not going that quickly up front. But the part of this race that I think I really want to highlight is when they get into the stretch and the turn of foot that this horse shows once he's peeled out of the clear. Flavian Pratt is still drafting in behind these horses as they come to the top of the stretch. But when they get to the quarter pole, he's going to steer this horse out into the 3 path, and just look at the way that Earl's Rock levels off and sprints to the wire. This is that kind of European turn of foot that a lot of owners who buy horses from Europe really seek. And this horse showed it here in his first U.S. start. And the runners that are behind him, they're not bad. This was a decent race. Earl's Rock gets an 80 buyer for this victory as you see him just sprinting away from these horses through the final eighth of a mile. The time formula speed figure came back a little bit higher, a 106. And I think this is a horse that could have stakes potential. He's by Fascinating Rock, who is a winner of the Champion Stakes, going 1.25 miles over in England. So there's definitely potential for him potentially to go longer in the future. And I just think Earl's Rock is a horse that showed a lot of talent in his U.S. debut and is one that might be worth following in a tougher spot next time out. One more race to talk about on this edition of Horses to Watch. That's a race from Gulfstream Park last Sunday. It was actually the last race of the week at Gulfstream, race 11 on that Sunday card. This one's a maiden special weight for the 3-year-old fillies, going 1.16 miles on the turf course. Let's break them from the gate, and we're going to focus on the number 6 Jouster. She is a horse who was actually making her turf debut in this race. This is a Todd Pletcher trainee who had made 2 prior starts on the dirt in New York. She had been sent off the favorite in both of those races, once in the mud at Saratoga, and then again stretching out to 1 mile on a fast track at Belmont Park. In both of those races, she showed some speed, but wasn't able to carry up the distance and faded at the end, actually faded very badly at the end of that 1 mile race on the dirt. Turns out, though, she's definitely a turf horse based on this race, because this is the kind of turf debut that can really turn some heads. You see that first quarter go up in 23-1. That's not too fast for Gulfstream Park. It's pretty moderate. She's going to slow down the pace a little bit more as they get onto the backstretch, but you see that she is doing it well within herself, not being asked for anything on the backstretch of this race. The field's not really bunching up behind her. They're spread out enough, so suggesting that it was a moderate to honest pace. But as they move into the far turn, without any encouragement from the rider, she is just going to slowly begin to inch away from this field. And one by one, you're going to see horses behind her start to come off the bridle, indicating that she is just running in a different race than anybody else. Now, I don't think it's a big surprise that this filly handled the turf so well, because she is by Noble Mission, who has gotten horses that can run on dirt or turf. But on the dam side, this is a strong Phipps family. Her second dam is that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies winner, Storm Flag Flying. That's the family of My Flag and Personal Ensign, and all of those horses that are descended from that My Flag and Personal Ensign family, they do have a little bit of turf inclination. And look at this filly Jouster now that they're into the stretch here. She's opened up 6 lengths under basically no encouragement, and Louis Sai has asked her for a little bit of run past mid-stretch, and she is just widening away from this field with these long, loping turf strides. Just a horse that really took to the surface, and you see the final time of that race go up, 1:39 4/5 seconds. She ran that final 16th of a mile in 5-4. If you look at track before that, she had thrown in a nearly 22 flat quarter mile before that final 16th. I mean, she was just finishing off this race with a ton of energy. She got an 84 buyer for this 9-length victory. Looking through the field, that number could have been higher, because horses that finished behind her already had form, like Wow, a Mark Hennig trainee who had run some good races, some high 70s buyers in New York, Never Content, who was also coming out of some good efforts at Belmont and Aqueduct. And that 84 buyer actually got a 112 time form US speed figure, about 8 points higher than if you just translate the buyer to the time form US scale. And that 112, that's the kind of number that's going to win graded stakes races for these 3-year-old fillies on the turf. You might remember back to the summer of last year when they were running a lot of these stakes races for the fillies, the 3-year-old fillies, I should say, on the turf. And you were seeing a lot of speed figures in that 110 to 115 time form US range. And this filly already ran that kind of number in a maiden race in January. So just based on the way she won this race, based on the speed figure she earned, this filly Jouster is one that has a big future in stakes races in the coming months. Well, those are all the horses to watch for this week. Remember, if you want to follow any of these horses in coming weeks, whether to bet them back or just to see how they do in their subsequent starts, you can use DRF Watch Mail. Just search for Horse Watch on DRF.com. You can add these horses to a list, get email notifications when they run back or when they work out or have results in the future. That's how I like to follow these horses when they come back in their subsequent starts. So thanks for watching this week, and make sure to stay tuned for another edition of Horses to Watch next Wednesday.